Log on to Roto Experts. Click on the NASCAR tab for Dan Dobish's 2016 fantasy rankings. And soon, if you're in the forums at Daily Roto, you'll see the videos from this guy. He won 5 DraftKings tournaments last year in daily fantasy. Even Tommy G follows him on Twitter at SeanMan247, SeanMan247. Here to preview Fantasy NASCAR with us for 2016, Sean Engel. Sean, good morning. Welcome to the show to talk Fantasy NASCAR.
Thanks. Glad to be here. I'm the fancy host of the hat, as you guys may know, and I'm wearing a winter hat. It's actually pretty cold out here, and I couldn't wear like a fedora or anything, so I thought this was like a nice substitute.
Yeah, if you watch Sean's video, he's the fantasy ace with the hat. He has a different hat every week, and like he says, the cold weather. But you're feeling warm about Fantasy NASCAR. For those who playing Fantasy NASCAR for the first time or just getting used to it, you and I were both very excited when DraftKings finally launched the game last year. Now it's back. Some of the salaries are already up on DraftKings. We're already talking about lineups, you and me and some of the other people that play Fantasy NASCAR. As people get into Fantasy NASCAR for the first time, what are some of your recommended strategies, for building a lineup week in and week out?
For building a lineup week in and week out, I recommend taking a look at all sorts of different statistics, such as loop data, and also sticking around. Like, for example, if you're playing on DraftKings, there's a bit of an average salary cap that you can look forward to as a bit of a reference. I usually do that a lot when I set my own lineups, and I figure if you're new to the sport, it's a good way in order to keep your lineups in check, too.
Yeah, so what you're saying is, maybe after you put Logano and Keselowski in there, look at what your average salary is remaining and then try to pretty much pinpoint your drivers from there.
Yeah, that's about my strategy.
So, what do you recommend for the newer player? Like we always talk about, people getting in 50-50s first, though. I know, but when you started, though, you dove right into the tournaments. What's the difference between tournaments and 50-50s from a NASCAR perspective for you?
Well, tournaments and 50-50s. Tournaments, I feel, is a lot more risk, a lot more higher level play. Usually you have to set a lot of lineups that are just like, that they're really good. You gotta know that they're really the types of lineups that will win the race for you. Whereas 50-50s, you could kind of be a little bit more safer, and you could set like more lineups, because a lot of those sorts of 50-50s contests usually don't have like as high in terms of like entry fees and all that. So you could really experiment with a bunch of different lineups too if you really wanted to.
Now, you're a guy who likes to put in multiple lineups, though, and you did that from the very beginning when you started playing. What do you look at, when you're putting in multiple lineups? How do you diversify?
I diversify by trying not to pick too many of the same drivers within each lineup, because in NASCAR, you never know what's truly going to happen. I mean, some of the best drivers can even just crash out easily. Say for example, like maybe even Joey Logano within like the fourth lap of a race. He could go right on out, and that's going to take out a lot of lineups on a good track.
So when we look ahead to the Daytona 500, we're going to hear my interview with Joey Logano in the next segment, Sean. And, he talks about how Daytona is a real dice roll. If somebody's playing at Daytona on DraftKings for the first time, maybe it doesn't give you the best picture of what to expect in Fantasy NASCAR every week, because the tracks are always different. Momentum's always different from week to week. Daytona can be a real crapshoot, because we've seen guys like Trevor Bayne win the Daytona 500 before. So is Daytona and the restrictor plate tracks, are they the most challenging of the races?
I personally feel that they really are.
Why?
Mostly because, like I said before, there's the whole giant element of not knowing what's going to happen, and that gets amplified totally when you go to Daytona or even Talladega, because those are restrictor plate tracks. When you go to a restrictor plate tracks, almost any driver has an equal chance of winning, and there's always a chance that there could be a big crash that happens right at the end of the race, and that literally will flip-flop everything around.
What are some of your early favorites for Daytona? I'm looking on DraftKings, and you got Dale Earnhardt Jr., who's great at restrictor plate tracks, for 9,900. Jimmy Johnson's 9,600. Joey Logano, the defending champion, only 9,300. How many of these drivers can you realistically fit in your lineup, for DraftKings for the Daytona 500?
I would say you can fit about maybe 2. But maybe you could think about going for 3, but then you'd be forced to pick a really low-level driver, like somebody with really low value.
Now you've played on DraftKings a lot, but you also give out a lot of advice for Yahoo and NASCAR Fantasy Live. How is it different from the seasonal perspective? In Yahoo, you only can use a driver maybe 9 times. So, what do you recommend staying with a guy when he's hot, or conserving? Those type of starts, because I found like conserving starts really didn't work out well enough for me last year. Maybe I should have rode a lot more Kevin Harvick earlier in the year.
Or in the case of Martin Truex Jr., him too, within the first 14 races or so.
Right. So do you recommend, sticking with a driver while he's hot and just burning all the starts, or, but do you play it more conservative?
I would say use him while he's hot, but also think conservatively too. Like, you want to use him just enough so you don't waste all the starts completely, because sometimes a driver can cool down within the middle part of the year, such as like Jimmy Johnson. He tends to do that within a lot of his seasons. Like, he cools down in the middle, but then towards the end he heats right back up. So you got to be ready for situations like that too.
Yeah, and you got to look at past trends a lot. And when you play on NASCAR Fantasy Live, it's more of a salary cap game. Do you recommend just going with Logano and Jimmy, or somebody like that, or Logano and Kyle Busch, and just maybe working around them and having them as your basis for the entire year, because you'll see their salaries increase as they do well for you?
Yes, I definitely recommend that.
So, do you feel like if you're good on NASCAR Fantasy Live that you'd be good on DraftKings, and why?
Well, I usually see the Fantasy Live and DraftKings as 2 different entities. DraftKings is more like daily fantasy. Yahoo, on the other hand, I mean, you take it. It is like DraftKings in the fact that you do take it by a week basis, but the whole thing is that you kind of think about different mindsets, because DraftKings, you go in a bunch of different contests and tournaments all at once, and you're dealing with different levels of competition. With throughout Yahoo or Fantasy Live, it's a different type of competition that you're dealing with week in and week out.
What are some of your breakthrough and sleeper drivers that we've consistently watched this year, and why?
Do you mean breakthrough drivers for Daytona, or just for
the whole season?
Well, if anything, the what we should really keep our eye on this year are the rookies coming up, particularly like Chase Elliott, Chris Buescher, and Ryan Blaney.
Why?
Because they're gonna be it's like they're a bit of a wild card. Their values could change year in and year out, and there's a lot of focus on these rookies, and they'll probably start out maybe at a mid-range value for a bunch of the earlier races, but as they go on up and do well, and there's a good chance that these 3 drivers can actually do well, especially with Chase Elliott or Ryan Blaney, because of their affiliations with certain teams. And as they end up doing better and better throughout the year, that's when their value is going to go up. You want to use guys when their value is at their lowest, so you could take advantage of that fact and have a really solid lineup.
Are there any mid-range drivers that are poised to make a leap into the next echelon?
The first driver to me that kind of comes in mind is Austin Dillon.
Why?
Austin Dillon, he's been slowly working towards getting better and better, and it's been showing, especially towards the second half of the previous season.
You're just saying that because, I'm friends with Austin and you want to get on his good side, right?
No, I'm actually being serious, too. Throughout the second half of the season, you've been seeing him more so within like the top 20 in races, the top 15, and that's definitely a more positive direction for him. And he can probably continue it up this year and look to maybe find some way that he can get into chase and end up being a really solid lineup tool.